Decades before the tragic events of 9/11, the United States was already under siege, not from foreign armies, but from coordinated terrorist plots. Businesses were bombed, innocent people lost their lives, and icons of freedom became targets of brutal destruction. These attackers weren't acting on impulse. They were swift, methodical, and extremely lethal. As the violence intensified, there seemed to be only one force standing in their way: the FBI. Back in the 1970s, America became an unexpected battleground, not for war between nations, but for a violent campaign led by Croatian radicals. Their targets weren't random. They were aimed at fellow Croatians living peacefully in the U.S. "My name is Carl St. I used to run the FBI's New York office," begins a narration. Agents across the country worked day and night to dismantle this network built on threats, bombings, and targeted killings. Croatian families who had nothing to do with the politics back home suddenly found themselves in danger. June 14, 1977, New York City. That morning, 3 men approached the Yugoslavia mission at the United Nations. A local NYPD officer was on duty outside. Inside the building, Yugoslav security guards kept watch. As the men entered, they were asked to show identification, and within seconds, gunshots rang out. Even though diplomatic missions are technically outside the NYPD's legal authority, officers rushed inside. "We need an ambulance inside now," someone yelled. Inside, the situation escalated fast. The gunmen had barricaded themselves upstairs and claimed to be holding a woman hostage. They made it clear if the police stormed in, she would die. One NYPD officer even offered to trade places with the supposed hostage. "Take me instead," he pleaded. But the suspects refused. The case quickly became a federal matter. By law, attacks on foreign embassies fall under FBI jurisdiction. Special Agent L. Cross was called in to lead the operation. "When I got there," he recalls, "the park was full of police. Snipers were positioned on rooftops. An emergency medical team had already entered the building to treat the injured security guard. Suddenly, the standoff took a dramatic turn. The suspect appeared at a window, waving the Croatian flag. Then, they began tossing flyers onto the street below. The message was loud and clear. They demanded the United Nations pressure communist Yugoslavia to grant Croatian independence. This was more than a hostage situation. It was a political statement wrapped in violence. They wanted the world's attention. They wanted to shine a spotlight on what they described as the oppression of the Croatian people by Yugoslav rule. A negotiator spent nearly 2 tense hours speaking with the gunmen. Eventually, they agreed to surrender, but only if U.S. federal agents, not Yugoslav authorities, took them into custody. They were terrified of being extradited, knowing it might be a death sentence. After being assured by both the FBI and NYPD that they wouldn't be handed over, the 3 suspects came out peacefully. "No sudden moves," an officer warned. But the drama didn't end there. As they were being escorted from the building, Yugoslav embassy guards suddenly stepped in. "Get out of the way," U.S. officers ordered. "This is embassy property. You're not in charge here. We operate under Yugoslav law," the guards countered. The standoff between the American police and the foreign security team was intense, but U.S. authorities refused to give up the suspects. After a tense few moments, the embassy staff backed off. This was the first time in U.S. history that a foreign diplomatic building had been violently attacked on American soil. One embassy official was critically wounded. Special Agent Cross took over the investigation, digging deep into what could have driven such an act. He dove into the tangled and bloody history between Serbs and Croats, 2 groups that had clashed for centuries over control in Eastern Europe. As Special Agent Cross explored the background of the attackers, a disturbing picture began to emerge, one built on generations of hatred, revenge, and bloodshed. The conflict between Serbs and Croats stretched back hundreds of years, with countless acts of violence staining their shared history. In the past, Cross explains, Serb forces raided Croatian villages, killing men, women, and children, and in retaliation, Croats carried out brutal attacks of their own. But things escalated dramatically in the early 1970s, when Croatian radicals began exporting their campaign of violence far beyond Yugoslavia's borders. In 1971, a Croatian extremist assassinated a Yugoslav ambassador in Sweden. The following year, they hijacked a Swedish airplane, forcing the government to release 7 political prisoners. That same year, another group admitted to planting a bomb aboard a Yugoslav airliner, killing 26 innocent passengers. This wasn't just a regional conflict anymore. It had gone global, and it was only getting worse. We had to understand their culture, Cross said. This wasn't just about solving a crime. It was about unraveling a vendetta that had spilled over from Europe into the United States. That was terrifying. Cross reached out to fellow FBI agents stationed in U.S. embassies around the world. The news they shared confirmed his worst fears. Croatian extremists were targeting Yugoslav diplomats and missions worldwide, and the attacks were becoming more frequent and more coordinated. Back in New York, Cross began working closely with local law enforcement and prosecutors, handing over detailed profiles on the 3 men arrested during the embassy standoff. 4 months later, on October 13th, a verdict was reached. The suspects were found guilty of attempting to take a hostage. One of them also faced an additional charge for using a firearm during the crime. For Cross, the courtroom victory offered only temporary closure. The deeper concern was that this was just the beginning. The threat of Croatian terrorism in America wasn't fading. It was gaining momentum. That concern turned into reality 9 months later in Chicago. The FBI received a series of panic calls from Croatian business owners. They had all received anonymous letters, written in Serbo-Croatian. The message was blunt and chilling. Pay a large sum of money or face severe consequences. I'm seriously worried, one caller told them. Special Agent Bean Morrison, working out of the FBI's Chicago office, took the lead on the case. Fluent in Serbo-Croatian and trained in counterintelligence, Morrison immediately recognized the language and tone of the letters as deeply threatening. These messages said things like, "You're not doing enough to take down the communist regime. We know your background. We know you can afford to pay," Morrison recalls. They demanded the money be sent to a specific address in Paraguay. If victims refused to comply, the letters warned of devastating consequences. It was clear-cut extortion, and from the FBI's perspective, a serious threat to the victims' lives. What the agents couldn't figure out right away was who was behind it. Were these letters part of Croatian criminal enterprise? Or could they have been sent by Serbian operatives trying to stir division? Regardless, the message was spreading, and fast. Across the country, the FBI documented 52 separate extortion letters, all sent to Croatian-American businessmen. While the wording was nearly identical, the amounts requested varied. Most of the victims were wealthy or financially well off, which suggested the writers had done their homework. In New York, Agent Cross took the lead on this wave of extortion cases. Looking for answers, he approached an influential figure in the Croatian-American community known for his peaceful views. "I figured maybe he could help identify who was writing these letters," Cross said. Cross asked him point blank, "Do you think Croatians are behind this?" The man shook his head. "Not Croatians," he said. "These are probably from the Serbian government. I believe the Yugoslav secret police are trying to split the Croatian community from within." According to him, while most Croatian Americans wanted to oppose the Yugoslav regime through peaceful activism, there was always a radical minority willing to go further, much further. Some suspected that Serbian spies were trying to sabotage the Croatian independence movement by posing as Croatians themselves. "I gave him my card," Cross said, "and told him to call me if he remembered anything else." Meanwhile, in Chicago, Agent Morrison focused on the Paraguay address, the place the money was supposed to be sent. The FBI stationed an agent from a U.S. embassy in Argentina to keep an eye on the pickup location. Eventually, a man arrived to collect the money, and that man turned out to be a known Croatian extremist. He had a violent past, including the murder of a Yugoslav ambassador in Sweden back in 1971. It was a major lead, but things were about to get much worse. Just a month after identifying the man in Paraguay, a disturbing call came into 2 New York news stations. The male voice on the line claimed he had planted 2 bombs, one at the United Nations headquarters, the other at Grand Central Station. The caller didn't sound like he was bluffing. By 1978, The FBI was deep into an investigation of Croatian extremists suspected of financing their operations through blackmail and extortion. Now, it seemed they had upped the stakes. In front of the UN complex, a security guard discovered an abandoned bag near the library. Alarmed, he quickly called the bomb squad. Close by, investigators found a letter, written in Serbo-Croatian, demanding Croatia's independence. One chilling sentence stood out. "This is just the beginning. Our mission is kamikaze." Bomb experts carefully examined the contents of the bag. Inside was a stick of dynamite connected to a detonator and timer, set to go off in 1 hour. Then came the second discovery. Another explosive was found inside a locker at Grand Central. This bomb was similarly constructed. More dynamite, more threats, and another written demand for Croatian independence. Had either device detonated, dozens, possibly hundreds, of lives could have been lost. The warnings were no longer just threats. The message had been painted clearly, both in words and through the bombs themselves. "We were seriously worried," one agent admitted. The violence was escalating, and the people behind it were becoming more brazen. The FBI's New York field office sprang into action. Agents began combining resources under one command structure to streamline the investigation. Their aim was simple: unify the effort, share intelligence, and prevent the next disaster. Special Agent Cross didn't mince words. "We had to pool everything we had. If we didn't, this would spiral out of control." 2 weeks later, the FBI's fears were realized. In an upscale suburb outside New York City, a Croatian-American businessman was gunned down right outside his home. He had refused to pay the extortion money, and now he was dead. The murder sent a wave of panic through the Croatian community. FBI officials were left with little doubt. The threats were real, and now people were being killed. Worst of all, investigators had no solid leads. In Chicago, Special Agent Morrison became deeply concerned for Croatian Americans under his watch. "These weren't empty threats," he said. "We had to assume that anyone who'd received one of those letters could be next." FBI agents scrambled to warn potential victims across the country. At the same time, they launched a renewed effort to trace the source of the extortion operation. They also reached out to other law enforcement agencies, urging them to be on the lookout for individuals buying illegal weapons or bomb-making materials. Then, a crucial tip came in. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, known as the ATF, alerted the FBI's Chicago office that a known Croatian radical had attempted to purchase a large quantity of dynamite. Undercover agents managed to carry out a sting operation. The suspect, thinking he was buying real explosives, purchased 2 crates of fake dynamite from agents posing as sellers. His name was Ivo Afinic, a senior member of a Croatian nationalist group known as POR, short for Hrvatski Narodni Otpor, which means Croatian National Resistance. The FBI suspected that POR had a more sinister, underground faction, one that didn't just advocate for independence, but was willing to extort, threaten, and even kill to achieve it. Afinic's purchase confirmed what agents feared. They were stockpiling supplies for more bombings. The POR members met regularly at a Croatian cultural club in Chicago's South Side. In a joint raid, the FBI and ATF swept the club in search of evidence. While they found the crates of dummy dynamite, there was no actual explosive material present, and nothing that would stick in court. That same day, a Croatian-American business owner in Chicago named Daniel Nikolic opened his shop, only for a devastating explosion to tear through it. He was one of many who had received a threatening letter, and one of the few who had refused to pay. Police, firefighters, the ATF, and the FBI all investigated the scene. Forensic experts quickly determined that the blast had come from a bomb placed on the roof. Agent Morrison spoke directly with Nikolic, who was shaken but alive. Nikolic believed strongly that the attack had been ordered by leaders of POR as punishment for defying them. With Nikolic's help, the FBI turned to members of the Croatian community, hoping someone on the inside would be willing to talk. What they needed most was a trusted informant, someone who knew the inner workings of the criminal network. But in Chicago, no one was willing to come forward. Finding a mole inside POR was proving nearly impossible. The group was tight-knit, secretive, and fiercely nationalistic. The extremist faction behind the violence consisted of just a handful of people, making infiltration incredibly difficult. As Chicago agents continued their hunt for a lead, violence struck again, this time in Pasadena, California. A Croatian businessman was shot just outside his home. Like the others, he had received a threatening letter and refused comply. The trail was growing darker. As violence crept into California, the FBI turned its attention to the West Coast, specifically to San Francisco, home to one of the largest Croatian communities in the United States. The mission: infiltrate POR before another life was lost. The Bureau selected Special Agent Bob Goris for the job. Goris was fluent in Serbo-Croatian and had years of experience in counterintelligence, particularly in cases tied to the former Yugoslavia. He understood not just the language, but the deep-rooted tension between Croats and Serbs, a conflict that had outlived empires. After World War I, Yugoslavia's borders were redrawn, often against the will of its people. Croatians had long resisted what they saw as Serbian dominance, and many carried that resentment with them even after immigrating to the U.S. Agent Goris knew he couldn't just walk into this community and start asking questions. So he ditched the suit and tie, opting instead for a more casual, approachable vibe. Most of the time, I talked to people over a drink at the bar, he said. We had to break down that wall of silence and find someone, just one person, who would question the morality of what POR was doing. While Goris worked the streets of San Francisco, FBI agents in Chicago and New York were doing the same, sharing information, cross-referencing leads, and searching for anyone within the organization who might be willing to talk. In New York, Special Agent L. Cross was leading the charge. It was around 6 p.m., he recalled, and we were reviewing our strategy, laying out our next steps when my phone rang. The voice on the other end belonged to Pero V., a Croatian writer who had been on the FBI's radar for some time. He sounded nervous and urgent. "We need to talk," he said. "Right now. I just got another letter. A death threat. I know who's behind it. I'll tell you everything." For months, Pero had kept his distance. But now, with his life clearly in danger, he was ready to speak up. Cross immediately headed to Pero's home, not alone, but with a team of agents. No one wanted to take a chance. They told me straight up, "You're not going in there by yourself. This could be a trap." Thankfully, it wasn't. Pero was visibly shaken. He handed Cross the letter, his hands trembling. "It says something bad will happen to me if I don't shut up and fall in line," he said. "These people, they're serious. They're watching me." After reading the letter, Cross knew this wasn't just intimidation. It was a credible threat. Pero confessed he believed POR members were responsible for the attacks, the threats, and the assassinations. "They've hijacked the Croatian cause," he said. "They're criminals, hiding behind nationalism." And then came the breakthrough. He gave the FBI names. According to Pero, the North American headquarters for POR was located in Chicago. He also revealed the identities of key figures involved in the group's most violent activities, many of whom lived in the Midwest. Everything was starting to come together. Acting on Pero's information, agents in Milwaukee reached out to a Croatian priest known for his strong anti-violence stance and deep influence in the community. An FBI agent met him at the Catholic grade school where he worked. During their meeting, the priest began sorting through his mail. He opened one package, a book wrapped in brown paper, but something wasn't right. The agent spotted a wire sticking out. "Wait," he said. "Don't touch that." Inside the package were batteries, wires, and explosives. It was a bomb. And at that moment, the school was full of children. Without hesitation, the agent grabbed the package and ran outside. The Milwaukee bomb squad was immediately called in. Tragically, when the bomb technician attempted to disable the device, it exploded. The blast severely injured his hand. The FBI wasted no time. They issued a nationwide alert to the 52 known extortion victims, warning them to be on the lookout for any packages resembling a book wrapped in brown paper. The very next day in Queens, New York, Pero retrieved his mail and found a slip notifying him that a package was waiting for pickup at the local post office. At the counter, the clerk couldn't locate it first. "Can you check again?" Pero asked. "It has to be there." Eventually, the package was found sitting on a shelf behind the counter. "It looks like a book," the postal worker said. Perro immediately called Agent Cross. "They sent me one," he said. "It's a bomb, isn't it? Should I go get it?" The package was rushed to the FBI lab for analysis. What they found was chilling. The bomb was nearly identical to the one in Milwaukee. Same structure, same fuse, same type of dynamite. Even the detonator and wiring matched. The postmarks on both bombs led agents to Akron, Ohio. They'd been mailed on the same day from the same city. This gave the investigation a new direction. Law enforcement in Cleveland raided the home of Pavel Kotoras, a known Croatian radical and the primary suspect in the bombing of a Croatian bookstore 5 days earlier. During the search, they discovered a hollowed-out book, a clear prototype for the explosive devices. There was no actual bomb inside, but the construction matched perfectly. It wasn't enough to press charges, but it was enough to confirm they were on the right track. In the FBI lab, Special Agent Danny Klein compared the 3 book bombs side by side. Each one had the same chemical composition in its glue, the same soldering metal, and even the same microscopic tool marks. It was undeniable. These bombs had all been made by the same hand, and likely more were out there. March 17, 1980, New York City. The streets were packed with spectators gathered for the annual St. Patrick's Day parade. Just before 11 a.m., a powerful explosion ripped through the 30th floor of a Yugoslavian bank. FBI agents, including Special Agent Ken Maxwell, were dispatched immediately. "We questioned everyone," Maxwell recalled, from bank employees to janitors to nearby office workers. But aside from one critical piece of evidence, leads were scarce. That evidence was a note, claiming responsibility for the bombing. The message made one thing painfully clear. The group behind it wasn't done. They vowed to keep planting bombs until Croatia gained independence. Then came another shock. June 3rd, 1980. It was a day like any other until the next attack. This time, the terrorists targeted one of America's most iconic landmarks, the Statue of Liberty. An intruder had snuck into the museum located in the statue's base, a space filled with tourists, history exhibits, and souvenir stands. The explosion obliterated the museum, causing serious damage to the statue's pedestal. Multiple radical groups claimed responsibility, including a Palestinian faction, anti-Castro Cuban exiles, and even neo-Nazis. In the early 80s, these types of ownership letters were common, but the FBI didn't want statements. They wanted physical proof. "We spent the entire night combing through rubble," said one investigator. Eventually, they found what they needed, remnants of a homemade bomb, and the components matched the ones used in previous Croatian-related attacks. What had started as blackmail and intimidation had evolved into something much more dangerous: full-scale terrorism on U.S. soil. The symbolism of the Statue of Liberty made it a prime target. To the attackers, it wasn't just a monument. It represented the freedoms they felt denied in their homeland. The bomb was meant to send a message: "Wake up, America. Take our side." But the plan backfired. Instead of generating sympathy, the attack on Lady Liberty galvanized federal agencies. It was a direct insult, a slap in the face to the nation's values. The FBI doubled down, launching one of its most aggressive manhunts to date. "We had to focus all our energy on key suspects," Agent Maxwell said. "The people who were clearly pulling the strings." In San Francisco, Agent Bob Goris continued his search for an informant within the radical faction of POR. It wasn't easy. For over a year, he met with members of the Croatian community. More than 300 conversations, each one a shot in the dark. His approach was simple: connect as a human being. You have to understand their culture, Goris explained. You need to speak their language, not just literally, but emotionally. You have to make them feel seen. Eventually, one man agreed to meet again, then again, and finally, he said the words Goris had been hoping for: "I want to help." It was a breakthrough. After thorough vetting, the FBI sent the informant to New York, where he reconnected with old friends, including suspected POR members. The risk was enormous. If anyone found out he was cooperating, it would mean certain death. But slowly, he began gathering intel. He learned that the group was planning to silence a prominent critic, none other than the writer, Perro. The plan was cold-blooded. kill him while he walked his young daughter to school. The child's life was expendable to them. For agents and officers, many of whom were parents themselves, this hit hard. How could anyone be that heartless? One of them asked. The informant confirmed that preparations were already underway. Agent Maxwell kept close watch on the suspects. One day, he saw two of them park a van near Perro's residence. What raised red flags was their behavior. They exited the front, circled the back, and removed a window. Then they taped a piece of cardboard over the opening. It didn't look like a casual stop. We couldn't see exactly what was inside, but we were sure one thing. They weren't grabbing coffee, Maxwell said. They were setting up for the hit. Cross rushed to warn Perro. Don't leave the house. Not even for a second. If the suspects had approached with a weapon in hand, the agents were ready to use deadly force. Fortunately, Perro and his daughter stayed inside, and the attackers left empty-handed. From there, the FBI zeroed in on a man believed to be coordinating the group's actions. Stepan Sick, the head of POR in North America. Sick hosted most of the group's meetings at his home, making him a top surveillance target. Agent Morrison explained the challenge. It's not easy to wire up someone's house without leaving any traces, but we're good at it. The FBI planted a hidden mic in Sick's game room, cleverly disguised in an arcade pinball machine. Every conversation was recorded 24/7. Croatian interpreters were brought in to translate not just the language, but also the coded phrases the group used. Terms like parts meant dynamite. Delivering the package meant planting a bomb. It took time, but they began cracking the code. They learned that meetings often happened in Sick's basement. One of the most dangerous men in the group, Jocko Jerven, the one who had tried to kill Perro, was always by his side. We had to piece it together like a puzzle, one interpreter explained, and every piece mattered. But then, disaster nearly struck. One night, someone noticed a wire connected to the pinball machine. "What's this?" a voice asked. One of the men pointed out that it didn't match any of the house's wiring. They followed the cord out to the power box and tore it out. The operation was almost blown, but the FBI wasn't done yet. Within 24 hours, their tech team reinstalled a new surveillance line, this time far more discreet. The suspects thought they'd won, but the agents were still listening. Soon, Sick and Jerven discussed a new plot. "It's time," one of them said. "You need to go through with it. Destroy everything." The target? A Yugoslav dance studio set to host a gala event attended by the Yugoslav ambassador, with over 300 guests expected. "We knew this was bigger than anything they'd done before," said Agent Cross. They didn't care who got hurt. Agents followed Jerven to Bridgeport, Connecticut. He entered a house empty-handed and came out carrying a brown paper bag, filled with something large and heavy. Then he picked up another man and headed toward Manhattan. They began circling a block repeatedly, clearly scouting the target. Once Jerven returned to his van and reached for the bag, agents moved in. "No way were we letting them plant a bomb in the middle of New York City," said Cross. "We had to act." As Jerven reached for the suspicious bag in his van, FBI agents surrounded him. The area had been under intense surveillance ever since the Bureau learned about the planned attack at the Yugoslav dance studio. Hundreds of innocent lives were potentially at stake, and no one was willing to take that risk. Simultaneously, FBI teams executed search warrants at the homes of Stepan Sick and Jocko Jerven. "Hands up! Don't move! Face the wall!" Agents shouted as they entered. Inside Jerven's home, Special Agent Ken Maxwell uncovered something chilling, a shopping bag stuffed in the back of a closet. Inside was a woman's purse that had been repurposed to conceal a fully assembled bomb. It contained multiple sticks of dynamite tied together, a timer rigged as a clock, and a live detonator. "You don't find a complete bomb like that every day," Maxwell said. It was ready to go. Jerven was arrested on the spot. Meanwhile, Agent Cross and his team searched the home of Stepan Sick, the man believed to be orchestrating the entire operation. Among a pile of clothes, an agent discovered a high-powered rifle with a scope and matching ammunition. The FBI suspected it was meant for the attempted assassination of the writer Perro, who had helped expose the group. Sick was arrested under the RICO Act, a law originally created to combat organized crime. But now, for the first time being used to take down a domestic terror cell. When Cross confronted Sick with the arrest of Wuka Julik, the man who had supplied the bomb, Sick didn't deny knowing him. "Yes, vaguely," he muttered. "We found explosives in his house," Cross told him. "We've got evidence, and you're in serious trouble." Still, Sick remained silent. Back in New York, the FBI brought in their most valuable asset, the Croatian informant who had infiltrated POR. Thanks to his efforts, they were finally able to get Julik to talk, but only after he was assured that a trusted Croatian would be present during questioning. Julik took a deep breath and said, "Okay, I'll talk." That moment changed everything. He confessed to being involved in a politically motivated murder years earlier, a decision made while drunk, believing it was in the name of Croatian freedom. But in time, he came to realize that killing did nothing but damage the cause he claimed to support. Now filled with regret, Julik agreed to testify against his former allies. His insider knowledge provided prosecutors with what they needed to dismantle the entire terrorist operation. With his cooperation, the FBI was able to arrest key POR members across 4 major U.S. cities. These weren't just low-level operatives. They were the shot callers, the organizers, the ones who financed and directed the violence. The RICO Act, passed in 1970 to fight conspiracies and organized crime, was now being wielded as a weapon in the war against domestic terrorism. Poor members were tried, convicted, and handed prison sentences of up to 40 years. "You don't win against terrorists by charging to the front door," one agent said. "You need the right people, the right access, and the right moment." And in this case, they had all 3. Fighting terrorists requires more than firepower. It requires understanding what drives them. Many of these extremists were fueled by a blinding nationalism, one that justified any act of violence in their minds. Unless you get into their heads, their views won't change. Even if you stop them once, they'll try again. But thanks to the dedication and patience of FBI agents, law enforcement finally caught up. The takedown of POR marked a huge victory for domestic security. A terrorist network operating inside the U.S. had been identified, infiltrated, and dismantled, and with it, countless lives were saved.